Hey YouTube, Poopslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source game I'm developing in the Godot engine. You can find a link to the source code at the GitHub page in the description below. And this month, in addition to adding some new visual cues for the cutscenes to help the storytelling come across a little better, I've also been looking into some potential performance issues and also localizing the game into other languages so that you can play it in the language of your choice. Let's get to it. So at the end of last month, the cutscenes were starting to come together, but it was sort of hard to tell who was talking. So I've made it so now when they talk, you can see their mouths open and close a little, and they spit out text, so it makes it a little easier to tell who's saying what. Let me show you how I did that. So to get the characters' mouths moving when they talked, I already had this mouth player animation player with animations for them doing things like eating or yawning, so I just added a new animation for talking. I didn't have to draw any new art assets, I just reused the same animation frames for the eating animation. Getting the characters to spit letters out was a little more tricky. I added this new chat letters node, which receives a signal every time a character talks. And when they talk, it activates this letter shooter node to start spitting out letters. Letter shooter is another simple node I wrote, which has a timer which goes off every few milliseconds, at which point it spawns a letter projectile. Letter projectile is what knows things like which font to use, which letters to cycle through, a simple physics simulation for making the letters launch in one direction and gradually slow down, and an animation player for making them fade out and change their scale and things like that. The last tricky part was getting the letters into the correct position, and for this I borrowed a technique from GD Quest, which is to use a remote transform 2D. Each creature has a chat icon hook, which shows where their little speech bubble is relative to their head. That was already in place just for having speech bubbles. So I just borrow that node's position, point the letter shooter in the correct direction, and fire the letters from there. And that's all there is to it. So also cutscenes sometimes now occur before or after a puzzle. They occur in more different places. There's more different kinds of moods the characters express, and I animated that. So just a little bit more nuance in the types of things that can happen in cutscenes. Also, some levels now you play as a different character, so rather than playing as your own character, in this level you play as Skins, one of the other employees of the restaurant you work at. And some levels have different customers, like this level has Ronk, who is a slightly chunky looking character who actually has a very fast metabolism, so it's hard to make them gain much weight. Also, one community requested feature was I added a little timer up here so you can see how long you've been on the current puzzle. And I also added a little delay when you're skipping through text so that you won't accidentally skip text if it hasn't even shown on screen for a frame yet. You know, it now has a little split-second delay. You have to wait a tiny, tiny amount. So I started looking into performance because my game was already running at 15 frames a second on my phone, which is pretty bad for a puzzle game with, all just 2D graphics. So why was it so slow? I created the stress test where you could add more and more creatures, and I did verify it's just the raw number of creatures, like 5 or 10 on my phone, it got slow, and on my computer, like 50 or 60, it got slow there too. So why were the creatures slowing it down so much? Well, I traced it down to these viewports that we're using to render the body. So the body is just this oval in the middle of the creature, and it needs to be rendered dynamically right now because as the creature eats, it gets like gradually fatter. It's not just like, oh, here's what it looks like small and here's what it looks like big. It has all the in-betweens. So it's rendered dynamically, and then it also has to be rendered into this viewport, and that's because it renders this undecorated oval, but then it renders shadows and the colored belly part, like the little purple middle. It renders that over top of it, but not just like, it's not like overlaid strictly. It has some intelligence to like, well, that's a line, so don't draw it over that, So point being, all that stuff has to happen in a viewport with some shaders applied to it. That's the only way I could figure out how to do that. So those viewports seem to take up a lot of video RAM, and then they seem to be what slows the game down. So I need to find some way around that. I'm thinking about strategies where maybe I'll pre-render this stuff. So I'll render what the body looks like at the current size and just store it in memory so I don't have to render a viewport every frame. But I don't really know. I don't know what the best way is to make this fast. I'm going to play around and do some research. If any of you have any clue, please let me know. I would love your help. Thank you so much. So I have also added localization support to my game, which is not to say that the game is actually translated, but the support for translations is there now. So if you launch the game and flip a switch, you can see it in Spanish, or what Google Translate assures me is Spanish, as I am not fluent. And yeah, all the dialogue, all the cutscenes, all the tutorials, all the buttons, they all have support for being translated someday in them. So the way that works is I'm using getText. And I am generating those get text files using a tool called PyBabel, which is a Python script which knows how to comb through GDScript files and Godot scene files and how to find what looks like it needs to be translated. So it'll find anything like if you have buttons or labels, it'll find the text attributes. If you have source code that says, I need to show the Spanish version of this, it'll understand what that function looks like and it'll pull that out. But what it is not smart enough to pull out is all of this metadata that I have that's in JSON. So all these cutscene files that say, oh, when this guy walks in, he's gonna blush and he's gonna say this, and oh, this level has a title of Hello Bones. It doesn't know which of this stuff is going to be shown to the player, obviously. So I had to write this little thing that goes in the middle, and this is pretty gross, but this is just a little demo that you can run and hit a button, and it'll extract all of the level data and all of the dialogue into a py file, a Python script, and it is not actual Python, but it just looks enough like Python that PyBabel will look at it and say like, ooh, Python, I know how to work with that, and then it'll comb all of the text out of there. So yeah, that was what I came up with just to get all of my dialogue into this template file, and it works. So now the template has all of my game's dialogue in it, and as a result, the Spanish translation has empty places where those translations need to go. And I translated a few using Google Translate, but there's obviously a lot to do. So my goal is not to translate the whole game yet, because that's dumb. It's going to change in a few months, but I just wanted the support there, and the support's there, so it looks good. So that's where we're at February. We got the cutscenes looking a little better. We added localization support, which is a big step. We don't know how to make the game faster, but at least we know why it's slow. So that's step one. Next month, I really do got to tackle finding some way to make the game faster than it is, and that's going to be no fun. So if I look like I got kicked in the nuts or something, that's what that's about. I will try my best. Again, if you guys have any tips, or if you've done this stuff before, or just have an inkling of how to help, I can use all the help I can get. Thanks so much.